Big shout out to Rob Kenner for writing Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. And you got quotes from Amir, Questlove, Thompson, and on the back of the book you have quotes from Toure. But the quotes and blurbs on the book don't mean anything. It's the content inside of the book. So I wrote a review of this, but it's a review without being a review. I will not give away any contents. We know the story of Nipsey Hussle. But let's get into this review. Because let's get to it. The comparisons to Tupac are consistent in the music industry. If an MC creates a song with an element of protest, or if the song is considered revolutionary, that MC might be the next Tupac. When an MC is active in his community, the same label gets assigned. Accolades are often given without consideration of the history of the person, and in many instances, these rappers don't even have the catalog of music to justify the comparison. But because Tupac died so young, there's a constant need for fans to create a legacy tied to Tupac for other MCs. The world loves a comparison. In sports, fans look for the next Jordan. This creates a situation where athletes are not admired for what they accomplish in real time. They are diminished by comparison, and in some instances, the comparisons can prevent fans from ever really discovering what that athlete is capable of. Comparison may appear to be flattery, but it isn't. Comparison derives from perception, and perception prevents really listening or viewing the work that's being done by an athlete or by an MC or an entertainer. This problem of comparison exists in music throughout every decade or generation of music. Now, for me, for years, Nipsey Hussle was a West Coast MC who looked like Snoop Dogg, and because of his affiliation with the Rolling 60s Crip, appeared to be another rapper simply following the path laid out by Long Beach's most famous Crip. Nipsey Hussle, however, he didn't sit in the shadows of Snoop. Yeah, he was tall and thin, a Crip, a rapper, but kind of like the comparison of Kobe to Michael Jordan. Kobe became his own brand, rising above the next label. To be honest, I didn't really know a lot about Nipsey before reading Rob Kenner's The Marathon Don't Stop, Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. I could be placed in the category of potential listeners who saw a facsimile of Snoop. I never gave Nipsey a chance during his time on this planet. It wasn't until both Kobe and Nipsey were gone that I took a moment to move beyond my own perceptions of neighborhood Nip. I had seen a lot of other rappers labeled as the next Tupac, and I kind of accepted it with like Kendrick Lamar. His lyricism reminded me of the MCs who I admired. In my head, Kendrick could be the next Tupac because he derived from the family tree of West Coast hip-hop, rooted more in digital underground than being a good kid who grew up in a blood-affiliated Compton where the music has a direct line to DJ Quick than it does to the revolutionary Oakland that kind of shaped Tupac. So I gave Kendrick Lamar that label and I was kind of okay with it, but then he rose above. But in West Coast terms, Kendrick's content was more Ice Cube than laid back G Funk. Nipsey Hussle, for me, initially just didn't seem like he could deliver anything musically beyond what I felt like I already knew after living with rolling 90s Crips. So when I look back at that moment in my life, which was completely unintentional and unnerving as hell, I placed my experience living in the 90s onto seeing this MC that looked like Snoop, who's from the 60s. And this is the crazy part. I had lived in San Diego, and I basically got stuck living in LA for a time, and the people I kicked it with were rivals with other Crips, Sets, and Bloods. And those rivals included the 60s. So I wasn't about that life. And for what I could ascertain, whenever I began listening to Nipsey prior to his death, he was definitely a Slauson boy. So I had biases, and I didn't give Nipsey a chance before his death. I labeled him, and I was wrong. So when I read this book, I finished the marathon Don't Stop. And the crazy thing is I discovered the history and the roots of how neighborhood organizations were birthed. And I knew these stories already. But what I learned was that Nipsey was Eritrean. And I immediately defaulted to athletes and students that I taught in San Diego who were from the continent. I understood, because of these students that I had taught, I understood what Sudanese kids went through, what Somalian kids went through, what Kenyan kids went through, and what Ethiopian families went through to make it to America. In Kenner's book, he focused several chapters on Ermias's trip back to Eritrea with his family. Rob Kenner, author of the book, he continuously utilized Nipsey's full name throughout the book. And there's a reason for that. It was important to humanize Ermias Joseph Asegedem. It was extremely important to say his name. And as I read, I could hear Nipsey's real name in my head. And reading about his background with a father from Eritrea, I realized what I thought about Nipsey was just like how people viewed me or any neighborhood people who may or may not be affiliated. I placed Ermias into a box incorrectly. But this is the irony. I placed him into a box, and it was the same thing that people who placed me into a box when I lived in the 90s. Although that was not what I was. But when people saw me, it didn't matter that I was a Navy veteran. I was wearing blue khakis. And although I hadn't grown up in the 90s, and I ended up there by chance, to a lot of people that saw me wherever we went, I was only those blue khakis to everybody that saw me. So here I was, before Nipsey passed, I was placing him into the same kind of box that people probably had placed me into without knowing the situation that I was in. And Nipsey had to deal with that on two fronts. To people in the neighborhood, he may not have been black enough because he was Eritrean. And to people outside, he was just a Crip. So forget music. Nipsey was so much more. So Rob Kenner, in this unofficial biography, laid out Nip's life and established how Nip searched for information. And I'm using his name interchangeably. Ermias read like a scholar. He hustled to get music equipment, computers. He hustled for everything. And when he began to generate considerable income, this is what he did. He launched a cowork style space named Vector 90 in his neighborhood, in Crenshaw, on Slauson. He had already gone above and beyond the words and actions of Tupac in his career by opening a smart store that allowed him to utilize merchandise to integrate his fans into a database, allowing Nipsey to be an independent artist. Tupac was never an indie artist. And to my knowledge, and someone can tell me if I'm wrong, he didn't open any stores and he didn't buy the block. But I understand the comparisons. But Ermias should not be compared or called the Tupac of his generation. I don't even care if he said it himself. Nipsey Hussle was a scholar, a businessman, an MC, a father, a lover who just so happened to be a Crip, who made millions, but he never left the set. He remained in the neighborhood to be a blueprint, and it may have cost him his life. And I say may because things can happen anywhere. The paradox of Nipsey's storytelling. When you compare it to his work ethic and his goals, it makes for a really complex narrative. This book by Rob Kenner, it's going to make you cry. It's going to make you cry. The knowledge that there's no happy outcome after the immediate success of victory lap is heartbreaking. And in the book, there are these vivid descriptions of the setting, and it creates these pictures. And the fact that his murderer was only recently prosecuted, it keeps the wounds open. In life, I overlooked Nipsey Hussle. And it's unfortunate that it took his death for me to find motivation, dedication because of this man. Get the book. If you've wondered why people are always comparing him, get the book. And I'm not saying that just so you'll click through and buy it. I'm saying it because it changed me. It changed me. And it gave me a lot of regret. I wish I would have understood sooner. Don't place your previous condition, your perceptions onto anyone. Marathon, don't stop. Rest in peace. Nipsey Hussle. Peace, y'all.